Okay. All right, we're going to do a quick little video, and I'm going to describe a couple things, and some of this obviously a lot of you already know, and then some you might pick up some tips, but I just want to kind of cover everything and then, see what is of value for you. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is show Sammy's back, and the idea behind this is, when you're training somebody and you want to try to describe it, this is like a very simplistic view to kind of show them how the shoulder works. All right, so I always kind of describe it as you have the shoulder as a joint, which moves around, but the shoulder itself is like the whole shoulder girdle. So it's the shoulder and it's the shoulder blade, and obviously your clavicle, which would be in the front here. And all of this is like, picture it as one unit, okay? So it's all the muscles in the traps and neck that elevate and rise the shoulders up. And then obviously the rhomboids and the traps and stuff that bring the shoulder blades together. And then the lats and the teres and everything that bring the shoulders down, okay? Now the reason I'm describing it that way is because if you have somebody that has like a lot of tension, like stress, migraines, different issues like that, especially people that work on computers and everything, and they're always tense up here, the idea behind it a lot of times is figuring out whether you should actually work these muscles or stay away from the muscles. But if you're trying to ease your way into it, if you think when you're doing movements, you first start off just contracting and bringing the shoulder blades together, and then when you're done doing that, if you can hit the lats and then bring everything down, a lot of times you relieve the stress up through here. Because a lot of this stuff is trigger points. So if there's issues, sometimes there's neck damage, sometimes it's just stress, sometimes it's just the balance between the pec and the back. There's all these different things that obviously come into play. But what we're trying to do is just relieve the tension for that day or try to build towards making it better. Okay, so that's the way I'm describing it. So now if we go on a movement like the row here, what Samuel demonstrated, the first part of the movement, if she keeps the hands low on the bar and she pulls back, she's going to be working obviously more lat, and she'll be bringing the rhomboids and stuff and bringing the shoulder blades together. Okay. Now, if the seat is lowered, then just bring your hands up. So if you lower the seat. So if the seat's lowered, now when she pulls back, you can see that the traps start coming into play a little bit more. So you can take this movement and have the seat at a position where you actually can do the trap, the rhomboids, and the lats. If you have issues where you don't want the tension in the neck, bring the seat up higher, and then you just be doing lats and rhomboids. Now, if your hands go to the top of the bar and she pulls that way, then you can see you really pull in the upper. So then this would be all upper back motion. So that's good, Sammy. Okay, now we're going to go to the chest motion, and we're going to still have the emphasis on the shoulder because it's still the same concept. Okay, so the shoulder's on the side right here. You can picture it. So it's going to come up to the side here, and it's resting right in the shoulder blade. But as you raise the arm up this way, you start opening it up, and you're starting to rotate in that joint. Okay, so obviously if there's shoulder injuries or there's stuff going on in the joint, if the arm is to the side and it's close and it's holding here and you're pushing like this, that will keep the shoulder set in the joint. And then as you raise up like this, you start you're making, like it's like that, you're going from here and you're starting to create that pivot. So I want you to visualize that pivot, because now, most of the time if you have like rotator cuff issues, this is where you can change that emphasis, because the rotator cuff can create some motion, but it also creates stability and holds the shoulder in place. And so when it raises out like this, the shoulder's a little more vulnerable. As the shoulder comes down and it gets set, it becomes more protected. And then obviously it does change the emphasis on the pec. And if we were doing a bodybuilding video, we would change some of this, but this is more directed towards how do I train somebody if they actually have issues. So if they have neck issues, if they have shoulder issues, you know, how am I going to get them in a movement and be able to train them without irritating those things? Okay, so if Sammy comes into the machine here, and she keeps the hands low like this and the shoulders next to the joint, and you push out, that will keep it really nice and close. And then if she switches, puts her hands to the top, you can see it automatically flares it out. But what happens is a lot of times you'll see we have like modified motions. So a lot of times we'll do like the top quarter of the movement. So we do short reps. And that's just to limit that range of motion in here. And then sometimes we'll do it, so then do the bottom part. So if it's there, and there's an issue where the person's doing their shoulder, and Sammy just do a hold. So Sammy's doing a hold like this. Okay. Now, if there's an issue where Andy's adjusting their shoulder and he finds that the shoulder is pulling in the wrong position, that's where we're going to modify this. So if the shoulder is tending to tip inward this way, and we want to be able to pull it out a little bit, then Sammy just brings her elbows in, and that rotates the shoulder a little bit like that. And then she does a hold, or maybe just a small quarter rep, and that'll kind of engage the muscle and hold it better in that position. Okay, so now here's another motion. So if somebody comes in, there's tension, we talked about it, and we want to kind of relieve the tension in their neck because they've been working all day and everything's all built up in here. This is a great motion for that because the idea behind it is we're gonna, as Sammy pushes down, she starts to open this up. So grab onto so she pushes down. The whole idea is that she brings her shoulders down this way, okay, and then rises and goes like that. So she's bending just her elbows, and then she's pushing down like that. And then you're getting a stretch up through here, and you're not building tension. So it's not doing it this way, which is also has a function, but we're not doing it for this video. The idea is that you're trying to hold it down as best you can, and then press down, and then that'll relieve that tension up through here. Okay, here's the next one. All right, besides the little peepee weight that Sammy's got on there to show it, she's got, we're gonna show a couple different ideas. Okay, so if you wanna work the lats and you wanna bring the shoulders down, then Sammy's gonna bring her elbows in, she's gonna lean slightly back, and she's gonna pull like that. So do a few reps like that. Okay, and so if you're on the machine like this, it's gonna be it'll be a lot more lat if she's doing it this way. Okay, now if she brings her hands towards the outside and keeps her elbows out and then pulls in, now you're going to be getting more upper back, so you get the rhomboids to come in. You might even get just a slight trap. If you look at the back end of the movement, you'll get a little bit of trap movement into it too. Okay, so if somebody comes in and they're super tense and you want to hit that muscle, then obviously you can do it that way. But if you're trying to relieve it and get rid of those trigger points that are getting the muscle to actually spasm a little bit, then you want to keep your hands in close and keep the body like this and maybe slightly lean back. There you go. Okay, now when I say lean back, you're pivoting from your hips, not arching back. Because if they arch back, then you're kind of jamming everything back up again. All right, now this will be similar to the row we started with. The only reason I'm pointing it out is because like the hammer strength one, it's got a chest pad on it, and it's a really big pad, so it's obviously built for you to lean against the pad. and do it. I very rarely ever have anybody lean against the pad. Occasionally somebody has low back issues or something, and I'll have them use the pad. But most of the time I have them either sit upright or lean back. And the reason being is that you're engaging the lower back a little bit more too, if you do that. But I know if you're spotting someone and you're on my side right now looking at the person, that's why we have the camera shot back there, you think they're leaning way back, and they're not actually leaning back as far as you think. Okay, so Sammy's gonna start with the first motion with the hands close, bringing her elbows like that. Now she's basically, she looks like she's tipped back to me right now. But if you see from that angle, it's not really like she's leaning that far back. And she's bringing them, keeping her hands are to the bottom of the handles, and her elbows are close to her body, and she's pulling like that. And so it'll be a lot of that, but it'll also be, you can feel your traps in it too. So there'll be a lot of trap. Now, if you want to increase the trap, she'll bring the handles, and you don't even have to go all the way to the edge, but she'll go out a little farther. She keeps her elbows out, and she'll lean back even further. And when she leans back further, it's almost like an upright row type motion, where you're going to get a lot of trap into it. So I use the two different angles, and obviously everything in between changes it slightly, but this are kind of the two extremes. Okay, this is a motion you'll see that we use all the time in here for low back issues. So the idea behind it is, if somebody's on the hyper and they have some back pain, and maybe you see that the pelvis is tipped, so maybe their one hip is up higher than the other one, it's a way that you can kind of straighten the body back out. So if, Sammy, you tighten your glutes, so if you squeeze the glutes really hard, and then you automatically kind of start to put an arch in here, so you want to watch body position. So if it has a really heavy arch, you want her to just release a little bit, so that way it takes the arch out. So she's not really over flexing her back as much as she's squeezing really hard on the glute. And that'll get her in body position, and then she can slowly let her arms off and just try to hold. And then you can just do sets of holds where you can just count maybe 15 to 30 seconds, have them do holds, and then get up. Or we'll have them do quarter reps, so Sammy will do those. So it's just to my hand there, and you can kind of give them a guide and just have them do these short little reps. And if you see, the back stays totally neutral the whole time and doesn't move. And so the pivot is through the hips, and the glutes are doing all the work. And if you do it this way, it becomes a ham glute movement, which is kind of what a lot of the ones are actually called, ham glute. But everybody always puts so much emphasis on the low back that you kind of take a little bit of that away. Okay, so that's the modified version of how we kind of use this motion, instead of doing these big, huge, full ranges all the time if somebody has back issues. Okay, we're back to this one because the one thing I forgot to talk about was short range of motion. And this is so debatable. You gonna hold it? Oh, that's a tough thing.
Baby weight.
It's always debatable, and everybody argues back and forth. But the idea behind it is, I want everybody to think about this stuff like each piece of equipment like it's a tool. And there's different ways of using a tool. So if you're using this machine, there's a million different purposes for it. There's a lot of variations of how you use it and why you use it. So if it's a bodybuilding thing, I know there's all the big debate about how it's full range of motion and that's the best and all that. And I'm not going to even get into that concept, but I want you to understand that just because that's a concept people talk about doesn't mean that you have to use it for everything. So if we have somebody and they have an injury or they're dealing with something that we're trying to fix, the idea of having to go through full range isn't always the best concept. A lot of times that actually limits and slows down their recovery. So the idea behind this one is the contraction of the muscle is, like say at the bottom of this motion, you're going to be in a full contraction and you're going to get all the muscles to engage. Okay, so Sammy is going to show you when she grabs onto this. So when she comes up to about here, and then goes back down, okay? And then emphasis is on that contraction. What she's really doing is activating as many muscles in her back as she can in that motion. So she's squeezing really hard, and even at the bottom, you'll see if she drops her elbows out a little bit, she can even pull in a little bit of trap and everything too in the motion. All right, so it's actually a very effective movement, but it seems like it's a really small motion, but there's a purpose for it, and there's times that you could use it that it's really helpful. Because say, for example, you had like a subscapula issue, and so you had the rotator cuff, this motion as she comes up to the top, right about here, it's gonna hurt a lot. But if she stays down in through this motion, it's actually more kind of like a rowing motion, and the subscap won't be involved in it. Okay, so if you see these variations in motion, that's why we're using it. We're not doing it because we don't realize you need full range, or people, or the person using it doesn't realize that. But it's the idea that they have an injury and we're just working around that injury. Okay. And this one is kind of trying to figure out when it's necessary, when it's not. But in most circumstances, if somebody has a low back issue or weakness in their low back, a lot of times in training, the concept is to have one dumbbell. So if she's holding one dumbbell like that, then the whole idea is everything over here is going to contract and stabilize this side, and you're going to get the muscles to stabilize the hips. Okay, but the point is that as these vertebrae, as all the muscles contract around here and try to hold on this side, you're starting to shift things. So a lot of times when people have low back issues, they have low back issues because the vertebrae are turned or tipped a little bit. And what you're going to end up doing when you do this is you're going to tip them even more, because the thought is you do it on this side, then I hand her the dumbbell and I take that dumbbell, and now she does it on this side. And you're hoping that when it's pulling unevenly on one side, and then you switch arms and pull uneven on the other sides, it'll neutralize. But it doesn't always work that way if the vertebrae are already starting to tip a little bit. So actually what works better most of the time is if you have a weight in both arms and you just learn how to engage the whole back and get everything to work. So you'd be better off, instead of using a light weight on one side, you'd be better off going heavier and having weight on both sides. And then doing this. Get this area, so you raise the shoulders up a little bit. That's going to get everything in here going. Then you're going to pull the shoulders back just a little. Now you're going to engage in here. And then when she goes to walk, she's elevated, she's under control, and then she takes a step. And everything will be engaged. And now, that's good, that's perfect. Then everything on both sides is pulling together evenly. And when both sides pull together evenly, there's actually a chance, if it's done right, you can actually start to straighten those vertebrae out if it's a strong enough load, and you have enough pressure on there. But you can actually even it out, and if you put, and you really work on the contraction part of it. Okay, then I'm going to add a little bit to what we just finished with Samantha when she did the short range of motion. The other thing I want to kind of describe is this idea that, because remember now, I'm not getting involved in the concept of athletes or whatever anybody's thinking about. This is for taking care of somebody. You're 40 and up, you're trying to take care of your joints, you're trying to be healthier and stronger. So the idea behind it is this: if you're sitting like this and your body is sideways, and we're going to go over that short range of motion, if the shoulder is right next to your body and it's held in tight, okay, the shoulder blade itself, everything is in place, and then your rotator cuff is activated if there's a load put on. So if your arms are in this position and your arm goes forward, if you watch my position, my shoulder is still in position, and I'm stretched out to here and I pull in. If I stay in this short range of motion, there's barely any movement in the shoulder and you're still working, your back or your lats. If you come out like this and you go past here, and this doesn't matter like we were doing there, whether it's a pull down or a row. If you go past, you go from here, if you watch, to there. And that motion is all in the shoulder. And you're starting to take the shoulder and you're starting to pull it more out of its position until you get all the way out here and you're totally stretched, okay? And the idea behind it is that you're starting to overstretch the shoulder. The shoulder has all those ligaments wrapped around it. And as you start to stretch those ligaments, the shoulder starts to get looser. And if the shoulder starts getting looser, then every time you move through that range, what you're starting to do is wear out that joint. Because once the ligaments are stretched, now it's not really tight and you get a little bit of movement and you're gonna start, and that's what everybody talks about. I got clunky shoulders. So most of the time when people come to us, they're looking to fix their shoulders. And we don't want to overstretch them and make them clunkier. So we're trying to tighten them up. So if you can get them used to keeping the body tight and flexed and everything engaged, and you're running through this nice short range of motion, you're going to work the lats, you're going to work your back, but you're not going to sacrifice the shoulder joint. And it's the same thing when you do a pull down. As the weight comes up, once it gets to about here, the shoulder, the biceps still engaged, the lats are always engaged, nothing rests. People go up here, most of the time, once you get to the top, they relax, even if it's for a split second. They're always relaxing and you're stretching that shoulder way out of joint. And then now it's out of joint and then you gotta pull it back into joint and bring it back down again. And when I say out of joint, I'm not talking about being dislocated, obviously, but it is moved and separated a little bit, and it's turned and rotated. And so you're overstretching it. So those full range of motion, you're really overstretching the shoulder. And most of the time, people come in, it's shoulder injuries, it's low back injuries. So even with this, if you're doing a row and you come way forward and then you pull way back, you're putting a lot of tension on the low back. If you keep the body in an upright position and maybe slightly backwards and tipped, the low back is engaged, but the spine is in a neutral position and it stays in that position. And I walk through this range just like this. Now my shoulder's not moving and my low back is stable. And so you're not sacrificing either one. When I do a pull down, if I come up like this and I stop short, then I have constant tension on the lats and my biceps, and then I pull back down again like this. But I don't go way up here, because when I go way up here, you're actually stretching the low back and you're pulling it and then you're bringing it back down again. Where in here, everything's engaged and then it stays engaged. And even if they lean back a little bit, all you're doing is engaging the low back a little bit more of the muscles, and then you're pulling back down. So a lot of times these modified movements, I feel really most of the time these modified movements actually help, because you're keeping things in a better position, and then the better position it's in, the less tension on the joint. The less tension on the joint, the body will recognize that and it'll feel more confident, and then the person will be able to train heavier because the joint doesn't feel like it's compromised, and the whole thing goes in a positive direction. If you go the other way, you're getting your full range of motion, but you're overstretching things, you're compromising the joints, and you're probably going to keep their strength level is going to stay relatively level because of that too. So that was another thing I wanted to add to it, because I think that concept you should think about in all the movements, because even as we do some of the other things and show them, I want you to kind of think about that at the same time, that we can modify these movements to put people in the right position to help them get better.